Analysis of household supply with water, energy, healthcare, and education. The analysis of the supply of other needs of agricultural families basically follows the scheme already presented in the analysis of food supply. However, there are differences in the factors influencing supply and demand. Further differences concern the impact of household deficits or surpluses on agricultural activities. Household water supply is primarily determined by 4 factors. The first is the available water sources, such as connections to public networks or private wells. This involves costs, such as water charges or costs for installation, maintenance, and operation of own water sources. In poorer areas without access to public water supplies, the labor required to transport water also determines water availability. Another key factor is water quality, which can potentially limit the uses of available water. The determining factors for water demand are family size and local water supply requirements. These requirements arise from the use of water in the household. The different types of use then determine the required water quality. Interactions over resources between the household and the farm arise primarily from competition for capital and, where appropriate, labor. The same areas of influence that are relevant for the analysis of household supply with water also determine the supply and demand of energy. The available sources determine the demand for capital and labor. The quality determines the possible uses of the available energy. Demand is determined by the number of energy consumers and their individual needs. These needs are determined by local energy use. The possible uses, in turn, depend on the quality of the available energy. The impact of household energy supply on agricultural activities depends on the local situation. A strong dependence of energy supply on wood collection can substantially limit the labor capacity available for agriculture. Other sources of energy supply require higher capital investment, which limits the scope for investments in agriculture. In addition, there is the strain on liquidity, which may not allow for high expenditure on energy. Household supply with healthcare includes the sub-areas of medication and nursing care. Cost and availability are the primary determinants of the first area. The second area depends primarily on available working time. In both areas, quality is at least as important as the available quantity of services. The needs are determined by the age structure and size of the family. More precise estimates are based on data on previously occurred illnesses and accidents. Healthcare influences the availability and capacity of labor for agricultural activities. Healthcare maintains the productivity of family members. At the same time, there is competition for working time, which is spent either on agricultural activities or on caregiving activities. This applies not only to the care of the elderly and the sick, but also to childcare. Furthermore, the costs of medicines and medical services compete with agricultural activities for capital. The main factor here is the strain on cash availability. The provision of education and training encompasses both formal and informal training. Formal training leads to certified qualifications. Informal training promotes practical skills without the obligation to take certified exams. The supply with education depends on the availability of educational institutions. Access may be tied to prior educational qualifications. If these requirements are met, The educational offer is determined by the distance to the educational institutions and the cost of enrollment. Another factor is the quality of the accessible educational institutions. The need for education is determined to some extent by local standards, but is primarily based on the wishes of family members. Relevant wishes presuppose realistic qualifications for accessible educational institutions. Once these prerequisites are met, the requirements for professional development in agriculture or other fields play a decisive role in determining the quality of educational needs. The extent of training needs depends on the size and age structure of the farming family. The analysis of supply and demand for training in farming systems must also consider the periods during which training opportunities can be accessed. Training opportunities are not necessarily aligned with the agricultural work calendar. However, family members are only available to a limited extent during peak periods in agriculture. Competition for resources with farm activities primarily concerns competition for capital and labor. However, training opportunities can make potential contributions to the economic success of farming systems, either through the improvement of agricultural processes or through additional off-farm income.